High Performance Thinking from Craig Stobo. Brought to you by Platinum High Performance Homes, Auckland.
Oh, Craig, you've got a sting. You've got people sponsoring you. They must think that you're worthy of financial support, my friend. How do you feel about that?
Oh, it's very well, grateful, Michael, and for you guys for sorting that out. Well done.
Oh, and we can't hear you, mate. So we'd love to get your reaction. So I'll get.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that sounds a bit better. Is that better?
Okay, cool. That's good.
Yeah,
I
no,
can
that's
hear
better.
you well.
That's cool. Yeah. Hey, this morning is Liberation Day. Well, no, it's Liberation Day yesterday at United States time. Donald Trump's announced this. Obviously, my reaction this morning is, wow, that could have been a lot worse than I thought it was going to be. And then, dear Lord, I wouldn't like to be an Asian country trading at the moment because they got hammered. What's your thoughts on what you saw this morning and the effects upon the country's economy in general, Craig?
Yeah, I think the thing is these new concepts called reciprocal tariffs are new. So I need to talk about that. But just back a little bit.
Craig, you're breaking up, mate.
Why
So
is
we'll try and get you
Trump
on.
doing this?
We'll try and get you on the phone. Our link is not good, so Craig, I'll get Craig. Don't worry, because gosh, I wouldn't imagine anybody more qualified to comment on this than him. Just to give you some background to Craig again. Craig Stobo. He is not just been one of New Zealand's leading business people, but he's also authored a number of reports on behalf of the government to do with tax reform in this country. He has chaired a variety of corporations and renewable energy firms as well. And he's been a diplomat too, dealing on trade issues in the past and in earlier life. So he is more than uniquely qualified to comment upon the reaction too. Okay, I've got you again, Craig.
Yep. All good. Thank
All
you.
good.
Thanks
Okay. Let's go back to where we were. So I was introducing you by saying it didn't seem as bad. I commented this morning that there were fears yesterday that it would be 20% on New Zealand. I think there was surprise that we were on the list at all. There were 15 dirty countries, I think, that he said, and we weren't on that list. And then there was a bigger list today, published of 44. We were on the list. The Asian countries got hammered, I have to say. Now, what are the likely impacts upon New Zealand from today's announcement and going forward?
I just want to back the truck up a little bit, Michael, to give context. So this is one of the few levers that Trump has as president. Many other things have to go through Congress and the Senate. So this is a unilateral impulse by himself. And he's doing it for a few reasons. Initially with Mexico and Canada, it was a bargaining chip over fentanyl imports into the US, which, it's a socially destructive drug. Yeah. Secondly, he needs to finance the deficit, and tariffs bring in tax revenue. And thirdly, and you can see that from where the speech was today, he's trying to support local industry. I'm not sure I would describe the outcome as being better than we'd thought. I mean, depends where you start the conversation. But he, as I understand it, is putting a 10% tariff on, as a minimum, on all imports, including New Zealand. What is difficult to understand when you held up the chart to go through, in a kind way, to use his words, his understanding or his government's understanding of tariffs or non-tariff barriers that US exporters face in other markets. So in their assessment, for example, China imposes 67% tax, tariffs, non-tariff costs on US exporters. And that could be pollution, climate issues. It could be related to currency manipulation. But it was hard to understand how he got to the number of 67. The kindness bit is, well, you're doing that to us, but we're a kind people, so we'll only impose up to 34% as a countervailing tariff on what you've done. In the European community, their assessment is a 39% cost imposed on US exporters, so he's going to put in a tariff of 20% on all imports from the EU. The UK and ourselves, we get off lightly at the bottom end of the scale at 10%. What he's been talking about is including, for example, in the European community, VAT, value-added taxes, as part of this calculation of tariffs that US exporters face when they go into Europe. Now, he hasn't necessarily done that with New Zealand, but as I said, we don't really understand, and we use GST,
Well,
not
might
VAT.
he have? Might he have used our GST of 15% and argued that that is a disadvantage to American exporters in New Zealand?
Well, he might have, except unlike VAT, GST is comprehensive. It's one of the few comprehensive taxes in the world as a tax on goods and services, and it doesn't discriminate against source or origin. So I'm not sure that he can argue he's less favourably treated than any other nation. So I think you sort of go from that background to say, what is the reaction of these tariffs over the next week or so? One thing I observed over the weekend was the resurrection of an agreement that's been latent between China, Japan, and South Korea. And they have now got back together to say, well, if we can't get into the US, or it costs us more relatively, why don't we improve our own trade relations? So quite apart from the increases in defence budgets around the world in reaction to other issues that Trump's proposing, i.e. reduction in fiscal support for NATO, etc., other nations are thinking, well, we'll increase our defence spending, but on the trade front, maybe we can get together ex the US and try and improve our own bilateral, multilateral relations ourselves without the US. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if that trend kept going. How do other nations work together outside of the US system? So that's the sort of first reaction. The second thing is there are going to be increases in prices in the US. If I face a 10% increase in the cost of a car from Japan, a Mitsubishi car, if I'm Ford Motor Company, why don't I increase my prices by 8%? I'm still competitive, but I get a huge gain for my profitability. So I'm sure the Fed Reserve is now definitely on hold in terms of how interest rates will track in the US. So that's the second reaction. I mean, I think the other thing for ourselves is we're no worse off than other nations.
That's
but
right.
what we have to compete with is US equivalent. So for our wine industry, we have to compete with the wines in Washington and Oregon, Pinot Noir, for example, that will now have a differential of, say, 10%. So our wines are 10% more expensive than locally made wines. We're no worse off than Australian or I don't think UK makes many wines that they export to the US, but in the case of Australia, we're on the same basis. So that's okay. And then you think, well, the last thing is this concept of trade diversion I mentioned last week. If I can't sell my BYD cars into the US market, I'll switch the console to the other side and sell it into New Zealand. So we'll be a beneficiary of trade diversion. What I don't know is the reaction function around the rest of the world from today. You can see the Canadians are going to be using this politically to drive an election campaign. There's now a building group of voters who are swinging behind the incumbent who is taking on the US as a disloyal, unhelpful, unwilling trade partner. And so it becomes political. And so there's lots of change to go around the world. I'm not sure I'd call it Liberation Day, though.
Well, it depends which side of the liberators you are, really, I guess, at the end of the day, Craig. Listen, the other thing that struck me, I'll go back to this, though. I don't know if you've got an answer to this question. I guess it'll come out in time. Of the list of 44 on which we were, as I said in my introductory comments this morning, there are 160 countries that weren't on it. Are they still going to be affected as well? Or do you know? Or are they exempt from these tariffs?
No, I don't know. I only got the message from Trump's address that there's a minimum of 10% on all imports. So
right.
I can't answer that. Why?
Well, that might be the answer to the question then.
Yeah. Don't know.
Yeah. No, as in, wait on, all countries have to face 10%, not just...
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
just those on the list. All right.
Correct.
Listen, the other thing is, but here's the question. The biggest, I mean, I'm sorry I went to it instantly, was the United States thinks, their Treasury, their economic advisors, the Trump administration, etc., that they are disadvantaged in trading with us. They are our second greatest trading partner after China, as you know. They're disadvantaged in trading with us because we effectively impose a 20% tax on them and their exporters to this country. Now, you said it can't be GST. Is there anything that we do, in your estimation, that can substantiate that claim?
No, I don't think so. The last time I looked for your program, the types of imports that we have tariffs on are things like shoes and some plastics. Don't ask me why, but they're all sub 10%. We're pretty much tariff-free, unlike many other parts of the world. So he's relying on non-tariff barriers for his argument with New Zealand, which I'm not sure they're not in the case of GST. They're not discriminatory at all. It's applied across all goods and services, regardless of country and origin. So I don't think it's got a leg to stand on.